Welcome to FedSoc Forums, a podcast of the Federalist Society's practice groups. I'm Nate Kazmarek, Vice President and Director of Practice Groups at the Federalist Society. For exclusive access to live recordings of FedSoc Forum programs, become a Federalist Society member today at fedsoc.org.
Hello and welcome to this FedSoc Forum webinar call. Today, January 16th, 2025, we're delighted to host a discussion on the perils and promise of AI in criminal justice. My name is Kayla Kleist, and I'm an Associate Director of Practice Groups here at the Federalist Society. As always, please note that all expressions of opinion are those of the experts on today's program, as the Federalist Society takes no position on particular legal or public policy issues. Now, in the interest of time, I'll keep my introductions of our guests today brief, certainly more brief than their distinguished careers would deserve. So I would highly recommend that if you're interested, you check out their impressive full bios at fedsoc.org. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Mike Hawley, who is the first Assistant District Attorney at the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office in Conroe, Texas. Before joining Montgomery County DA, Mr. Hawley served the United States Army as a military police officer and later a prosecutor and defense attorney. He left the Army as a major after 13 years of service and spent the next 6 years in private practice in the Lanier Law Firm before joining the county. Next, we have Patrick Robinson, who is the owner of VSV Leadership and president of the board of KID CAT. Before joining VSV Leadership, Mr. Robinson worked at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative as both a member of the Strategic Initiatives team and as Transforming Prosecution lead. Third, we have joining us Jesse Rothman, who is a senior fellow at the Council on Criminal Justice. He's worked as a researcher, educator, communication specialist, policy analyst, and funder across the criminal justice system and emerging technology landscape. Throughout his career, he's focused on supporting and implementing programs that aim to enable public policy that is effective, safe, and dependable. Fourth, we have joining us the Honorable Scott Schlegel, who currently serves as judge in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal for the state of Louisiana. Judge Schlegel also currently serves on the ABA and LSBA task forces on law and artificial intelligence, among others. He's the immediate past chair of the Louisiana Supreme Court Technology Commission and has served as the president of the Louisiana District Judges Association. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have joining us as our moderator, Mark Levin, who is Chief Policy Counsel for the Council on Criminal Justice and a Senior Advisor for Right on Crime. Mr. Levin has published dozens of policy papers on topics such as sentencing, probation, parole, reentry, and overcriminalization, and his articles on law and public policy have been featured in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, National Law Journal, and many others. And I will leave it there. A last note before I get off your screens, if you have any questions throughout the program, please do submit those via the question and answer feature, likely found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so it'll be accessible when we get to that portion of today's webinar. With that, thank you all for joining us today. Mr. Levin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this program because it's a chance to explore some really challenging issues. And we see the question of AI, including in the criminal justice context, coming up, not just at the federal level, but in state legislatures across the country as those 2025 sessions get underway. And so I want to just identify quickly a few challenges here that I think our speakers will be able to address. But first, of course, the overarching one of balancing the potential for AI to improve public safety and efficiency in the criminal justice system with also protecting our liberty and privacy through appropriate guardrails. And then secondly, what level of government should address this issue? And of course, as we know, the EU adopted a very sweeping policy on AI. And as we also know, the corporations, the major developers of AI operate in countries around the world. And so the notion that like one state, and some of you will remember Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill in California, the notion that one state perhaps taking an overly stringent approach to regulating would ultimately have the effect of, or the EU for that matter, preventing positive developments is a concern to many people. And then of course, there's this tension sometimes between glass box and black box AI, where the algorithms are public and open source versus ones that may be proprietary with a certain company. And that can come up as we get into questions of the rules of evidence and how do you validate a particular algorithm. Now, and then one of the other final questions I'll say that I think the panel will address is, who knows? How do we ensure people find out that there's transparency? And so that's where we had a great session at the ALEC conference, which Patrick was part of, where there seemed to be a lot of interest in let's have some level of disclosure in the criminal justice system to the defense, for example, but everybody as to when AI is used in various contexts. So those are just some of the really fascinating questions. But I think the place to start is kind of understanding what are the different types of AI technologies. And once we have that understanding, we're able to then think about how they apply in criminal justice. So to kick us off in that enterprise, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jesse Rothman.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks all for joining. I'm also very excited about this event. I think anyone who can say too confidently about what the sort of trajectory of AI implementation and oversight is going to be is probably talking their own book for some reason. But one thing that I'm really quite sure of is that having conversations like this is quite important, and being engaged and thinking about it is really significant. So glad to be doing it with y'all today. So I think thinking clearly about AI and thinking clearly about AI and criminal justice especially is really quite difficult, because AI itself is sort of an umbrella term that can sort of cover a whole bunch of different applications, models, types of technology, types of implementation. It's like a sort of set of things that kind of is meant to mimic human intelligence, which is identifying patterns, predicting outcomes, generating new evidence. The recent kind of wave of interest in AI and the sort of recognition that this is really truly a significant development probably started with the launch of ChatGPT in the fall of 2022, the public launch of ChatGPT in fall of 2022, which brought onto the scene the fastest sort of growth of a consumer technology ever, I believe. That it was using a product called a large language model, which is sort of developed on this architecture of deep learning that has sort of taken off since 2012, which is it's basically finding patterns in data and a tremendous amount of data, and being able to generate interpolations of those things that is really somewhat astounding in what it can do, and also worrying in the ways that it falls short. So you can see it, the sort of implications and applications of AI in the criminal justice system across many different domains, from things like predictive policing algorithms to help law enforcement determine where to put their resources, to things like facial recognition for identifying suspects and figuring out where to investigate. Things like the large language model sources have kind of use natural language processing to analyze documents, to create documents that's being used to find ways to reduce inefficiencies and bureaucracies. So there's just like a really tremendous amount of things that I'm very excited to get into with y'all today. To back up one step, I think at the risk of waxing philosophical, which I think is always risky, but is also quite important in the case of AI. Is I think we find ourselves in this position where the opportunities are really tremendous and the risks are really tremendous, and we have to think both concretely and abstractly. Both like, what is this tool actually doing, and where should we use it and rely on it, and what does it mean to have this thing that's trying to mimic human intelligence? That's a sort of a wild philosophical question. We have to think both presently and prospectively. We have to think what's happening right now, because it's happening across our courts, across the legal system, and also where is this technology going? We're kind of at the hockey stick point in this exponential growth curve, and it's really changing tremendously fast. And lastly, we have to think opportunistically and defensively. There are things that AI can do that we really want to help improve outcomes for our constituents, all of us. And also there are real risks that are new or that are enhanced from this, that we have to be thinking about both sides of this pole simultaneously. I'll end with one last piece, because I was thinking, okay, what's kind of like the one take home thing that I think people attending this webinar, what I think would be feel sort of robustly useful for people taking this webinar. And the one thing that I think I would strongly recommend everyone who has not yet done this is spend some time playing with these tools. Figuring out how our society is going to deal with these is going to come from all levels, from from regulation, from governments, as Mark was mentioning, from our courts, and also from the bottom up. And I think all of us as sort of citizens, as interested people, as leaders, should be thinking about what's the role of this in our work, in our planning. And a great way to do that is just spend some time playing with the tools to see what they can do. These large language models. So if you haven't spent 10 hours just like thinking about it, just go and do that, and you won't regret it. Excited to get more into stuff. I'll stop for now.
Right. Well, I'll pass it over to you, Patrick, and I believe you're going to kind of touch on. Obviously, you've got different types in terms of ChatGPT and then facial recognition and other approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be with you all. I and my co-founder run both a leadership and management as well as software consultancy focused on the work that prosecutors do around the country. The intersection of those two topics might seem unusual to some, but it's our strong belief that this emerging category of software will dramatically change the way prosecutors and the entire criminal justice system do their work. And that is both a challenge of developing the software as well as a challenge of implementation and therefore leadership and management. And so we connect both of those two projects, and actually have been working with Mike Hawley's office there in Montgomery County, Texas. I'm going to share a couple slides that we use to introduce AI to various groups, and then we'll pass it off to my colleagues and then onto the audience for questions. Let's see. I think am I sharing the correct screen? I don't know if I did that correctly. Hold on one second. All right. I believe that should be working. Are you all seeing the slides? Could someone give me a thumbs up? You can say, okay, good. All right. Thank you. So there is certainly an amount of user error that can still creep into using these tools. I think important to realize, though, that what we're really just talking about is software. And when AI works as expected, we just call it software. It's been around for quite a long time. It affects many different things that we do. And as Jesse mentioned, the kind of recent interest came about from a particular software program developed by OpenAI called ChatGPT. And that really launched this next wave of innovation from tech companies all across the world, starting to explore how large language models and this category of generative AI can play a role in organizations and what they can accomplish. When we think about AI, at least Sean and I, my co-founder and I, we think about it in a number of different taxonomies. There are a lot of different ways we could categorize it. We can look at AI in the context of the technique that's being applied. We can think about it as an application, something like ChatGPT or something else. We could also think about it in the context of the risks that it poses. There are a number of different taxonomies. One that we like to use actually lays out all of these different techniques. You'll see a lot of vocabulary words, and we don't have time to dive into them now. But suffice it to say that ChatGPT sits at the intersection of a number of different techniques in developing artificial intelligence. And it is a very small part of this broader AI universe. And there are a whole category of AI systems that actually don't rely on machine learning techniques, but actually mimic human intelligence in a different way by replicating it in the form of expert systems. But when we talk about AI, we talk about this whole broad landscape, not just something like a large language model or those tools. Really what we're looking at is how can we use these new software development techniques to solve human-related problems. Jesse also mentioned that there are a number of different applications of AI in the criminal justice space. This is just a very brief summary of some of the applications and how they're being used, but it does already affect the criminal justice system in investigative, adjudicative, and even corrections phases. And it's important to realize that it is present, it is there. I think Mark mentioned in his earlier remarks a discussion we had at ALEC around transparency. And that's really the takeaway that I will leave folks with today, that it is so critical that when we are using this type of technology in the criminal justice system, that we are transparent about the use cases so that everyone is aware of how it is being deployed, and we can better scrutinize what's happening. So I would argue as a baseline that transparency needs to be a foundational component. And then the way in which we experiment with AI, the way in which we regulate AI, all derive from that fundamental need to be transparent about where it's being used. So with that brief introduction, we'll pass it to my colleagues and look forward to some of the questions.
Thank you. Well, Judge Schlegel, you've been, I would say, the top trailblazer in the country on using technology in what was your district courtroom. And of course, now you're an appeals judge. So we're eager to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I thought it'd be a, fun thought exercise. I just kind of want to get people thinking about where we are today, how it's being utilized in the criminal justice system, and kind of where do we think it's going. As a former prosecutor, I was a domestic violence prosecutor when I first started out as a prosecutor. And AI just scares the heck out of me from that perspective, from a deep fake perspective. These video deep fakes, you can tell, the hand gestures are all wonky, the eyes are still a little, robotic and scary. But that's today. Tomorrow, it's going to be much better. But what really scares me is the voice cloning. My wife and I have been together for 30 years. So that means we know everything about each other. We know our socials, we know our DOBs, we know the dogs, the cats, everything. And any person can walk into a courtroom and get a protective order pretty easily if you think about the cloning perspective. So my wife has my voicemail. Mark, if you left me a voicemail, I own you because I can clone your voice in 5 seconds. And I can print out a little ChatGPT script, threatening phone call, put it on my phone. Cloning and duping your phone numbers has been around forever and ever and ever. Walk into a courthouse and say, my husband's threatening me. Every judge in the country will sign that protective order. Oh, but you have 10 days and you can go and, have your hearing for the protective order. But the guns are gone, the houses are gone, the cars are gone, the kids are gone, and you go walk into court. And what happens? My wife walks in and says, Judge, I want to play this tape for you. And no objection, that's not me. Whoa, 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 whoa. That goes to the weight of the evidence, not to the admissibility of it. She's known you for 30 years. That's your voice. She's identified it, admitted. And there we're off to the races. And all these cases are typically self-represented litigants. So who's going to hire these experts? Who knows that Jesse and Patrick are experts? How much are Jesse and Patrick going to pay for these self-represented litigants? And, at the end of the day, you might win a couple of years later. But that's what scares me the most today is this voice cloning. We had President Biden called everybody and said, don't go out to vote. That was voice cloned. We have this principal who got arrested and fired because the gym teacher cloned his voice because the gym teacher was suspected of stealing. Think about sexual harassment claims, all these different claims. That's what really worries me today. Fast forward to, how we can use it. I know Michael's going to touch on how the prosecutors can use that to help them with discovery. I know a bunch of public defenders that are using it to get through all of these different body cam footage. Now that everybody has it, they can't possibly watch all of those hours and they're using AI to go through it. But if you're like me, you loved RoboCop when it came out in the 80s, right? I mean, everybody in the 80s loved RoboCop. It could just do a scan and it could tell that Patrick was full of it right off the bat. We could do all these superhuman things. It's kind of here today. If you see the body cam footage is now able and layering generative AI to draft the first police report. My initial impression was, wait, what? No, we can't be doing that. But the more you think about it, you start thinking, all right, well, there's probably another 30 calls for service before that officer can get to the police report. And if the generative AI can actually do it in real time for that officer who can go back and watch the video and make sure that he got it accurately, why not? Maybe we should be okay with this. But it didn't see, does that generative AI have vision yet? Did it see that furtive movement? Did it see that was tossed? So, there's a lot that we need to think through. And what, am I going to now start signing warrants with PC based upon generative AI, establishing the PC for that warrant? Are the cops, when they take the stand, who may or may not reviewed this. How do I cross-examine if I'm a public defender, or how do I do a direct examination on a police report that the officer may not have written? So these are just fun little thought exercises that I like to do on a consistent basis. And think about interrogations. Think about if I was a murder detective and I had a couple of interviews from witnesses already. I've already gotten the initial crime scene photographs, and I have my suspect in front of me. Why couldn't I wear some glasses like you have on, Mark, that I've already loaded an LLM with all of the witness statements, all of the different crime scene photographs, all the evidence that I know at that point. And when Michael says something, I have it running in the background saying he's full of it, or ask questions about this. And I'm able to actually in real time with an LLM start actually interrogating the suspect based upon information that I have in my ear or in my line of sight. So these are fun things that I do on a daily basis and think through, how is AI going to impact the justice system, both negatively and positively? And then from a specialty court perspective and holding people accountable, but caring enough about them to help them succeed and actually help them get through the system. How do I use generative AI to actually help people actually manage all of the obligations that they're placed upon them in these specialty courts to kind of essentially be a case manager to help them through the process? So those are some of the top of the mind things when I talk about the Gen AI and the criminal justice system.
Yes. Well, thank you, Judge. You've done great work in terms of connecting people, in your treatment court to services using technology. And it's really terrific. Michael, I wanted to move on to you. I know in what you've written, you've really highlighted some ways that prosecutors can use AI to be more efficient in this day and age with, case backlogs and such. So I look forward to your thoughts on all of it.
Yes, thank you. So one of the benefits of getting older is that I'm the recipient of this cutting edge publication by AARP. And this month, the lead article discusses physician shortages. And by chance, I intended to frame my initial comments in those terms, because just as many communities in the country are struggling to find physicians and suffering as a result, there are many communities trying to find prosecutors and suffering as a result. And I'm not sure this is well known, but there is a widespread epidemic of vacancies. There are many offices in the country that are operating at 75% capacity and some at 50%. And so even when you're fully staffed, and the judge will affirm this, you're very busy. But when you have those kind of vacancies, justice suffers. One consequence is that you can't pour into the next generation. They're not trained, you have higher turnover, and so then you have a dearth of experience, and again, justice suffers. And this analogy, the doctor analogy, is particularly apt for state prosecutors. State prosecutors are like ER doctors. You have to have them, and they treat every case that comes to the door. It's different than federal prosecutors. They account for a small minority of the criminal cases in the country. But the state prosecutor, like the ER doctor, again, handles every case that comes through the door, and the cases never stop. And when they come through the door, you have to have the right resources, or you risk either over or under prosecution. And the mistakes can go both ways. Our job is to ensure that the innocent are cleared and the guilty are held accountable. But if you have these vacancies and lack of experience, you can err on either side. And so a possible help is through more and better use of technology, including AI. I do want to make just a quick side point. I want to make the case for the dangers of under prosecution. I'm somewhat defensive of the criminal justice system, particularly in my jurisdiction, Montgomery County. I know it's not a popular place to stand. I know there are problems with it. I know there's room for improvement, but I'm not sure there's a full appreciation of how well our system does work in light of what we value as a society and compared to the alternatives. And I'm not sure that under prosecution gets enough attention. The need to fully resource law enforcement, including prosecutors, and the challenges that go on there, I guess that's for another day. But with respect to AI prosecution, our work falls into three broad categories. The first is information. We are trying to collect information from police, from witnesses, from defendants, from legal sources, a whole variety of sources. And there's just an amazing amount of information that which then must be shared. The second is effort. That's the analysis, the thought, the crafting of ideas and expressions. It's us speaking to witnesses, ordering information, responding to defense assertions and arguments. The writing, it's the work of lawyering. It's melding the information to the problem at hand to accomplish a particular outcome. And then finally is judgment. What is justice in an individual case? For example, as a prosecutor, how much mercy am I willing to dispense short of a full accounting by a judge or jury? So Judge Schlegel has written on this subject very well, and he talks about we don't want an algorithm making those decisions that a human generally does. And he talks about the feel of each case, which is a very real thing, that each case it's different. The criminal justice system at its core is a system that deals with what it means to be a human and about human values. And with that said, you can inform and refine judgment with experience and additional information. But in each of those areas, in information and effort and judgment, AI's got a role to play because technology has a role to play. And as Patrick and Jesse have said, AI is just another form of technology. But these are very powerful tools and they require robust safeguards. Very few people at home get injured using a level. Many people at home get injured using a table saw, and AI is much closer to a table saw than it is a level. And so there's three areas that are of issue. The first is security of sensitive information. So I don't want a defendant's criminal history, or a victim's for that matter, known to the public before a case is resolved. And depending on where I put my information into an AI system, that could happen. The second is fabricated evidence. Generative AI tools lie. And they lie very convincingly. And prosecutors in particular, all officers of the court, but prosecutors in particular are supposed to be guardians of the truth. And we're supposed to ensure that anything presented to a judge or a jury or opposing counsel is true. And that's a non-negotiable. And then finally, this idea of encroachment on civil liberties. We want state-of-the-art tools for investigations, but we want them to comply with statutory and constitutional safeguards. So one more point and I'll be done. Those are, apart from the affirmative role AI can play, and I can talk about specifics if that's helpful, there's a defensive role. Judge Schlegel has mentioned the deep fakes, for example. AI is a technology. Technology is used to hurt people. There's always a market for this. It's a growth market. The idea that you can commit fraud on an individual with a clone voice or on the court is a concern to us, or that you can undermine the confidence of jurors. I'm also concerned that the defense bar and prosecutors remain somewhat in equilibrium. The attorney who does not use AI will soon be at the mercy of the attorney who does. I really believe that. And that's true of the civil realm as well. So in that sense, it will soon not be an option to just ignore AI. I honestly think, and I think most of the panelists think, that day is already here. It is a topic that creates strong emotions, but I would encourage everyone listening to be neither fearful or gullible, but just cautiously optimistic and intentional about the use. We have a saying in Texas that some guns kick and shoot. AI is like that, but I still think this is a tool worth enlisting and a service for the good of all of us.
Well, that's terrific. And this has been a great introduction. Before, I've got several questions and we have some coming in. Do any of you want to respond to something another speaker said? And if not, we'll go straight into the questions.
I just love how people from Texas always need to throw that into their conversation.
Well, we say there's two types of Texans, or two types of people, those who are Texans and those who want to be. So, but we do have a couple of kind of technical questions that came in about what are the most common used voice cloning programs, and also what computer software would give forensic scientists and forensic investigators the ability to detect when AI is used to fabricate evidence. And somewhat related to that last question, I'm familiar with a court decision in which basically there was no human expert who could testify about what factors went into the algorithm. So the court said it wasn't admissible. The AI was used to enhance a photo or something. So anyway, does anyone want to address both the voice cloning and the question about whether forensic scientists or investigators can detect when AI is used?
Well, I'll let the technical guys take the technical question, but just dovetail off of what you said. We don't have to worry about just deepfakes. We also have to be concerned about evidence enhanced by AI. And the case that you're referencing was a case out of the state of Washington. It was a homicide case. The criminal defendant hired an expert, a so-called expert, to enhance the video of the alleged crime. And as we all know, we used to fight back in my day of whether you could zoom in on a photograph or not, because the zooming was somehow changing the evidence. In this case, the AI enhancement was essentially filling in pixels that didn't exist, and it was enhancing it by predicting what the next pixel was. Thankfully, the judge did a very good job going through it and said, this is not coming in. This is not even close to being admissible. And he did a very good job going through that. So AI enhanced evidence is also something that the courts are going to have to grapple with to determine whether or not, it's the Jessies and Patricks of the world can do a good enough job explaining to us why we should allow such things.
Let me ask another question, which, and this kind of brings it back to the broader level here, but do we, I referenced at the beginning, of course, the proposals to regulate AI overall. And of course, you have a congressional effort, Jay Obernolte from Republican for California and others. And then, of course, you've got the state proposals here in Texas. You've got one from a friend of mine, Representative Giovanni Capriglione, who's led an interim committee on this for the last year or two. And then, of course, lots of other states, obviously Colorado, I believe, already adopted a measure. And of course, when you have companies releasing software for the whole world, or at most maybe one version for the US, you can't make a separate version for every state. It wouldn't be efficient. So the question that I have is, does it make sense for this to be regulated? At what level? Is it the federal level? Is it the state level? Is it at the technology level or the app level, the individual application and how it's used? And also, to what degree does it need to be specific to the criminal justice system, or could it cover civil cases too in terms of the rules of evidence? So I think it seems like we're having challenge where we don't really know at the level of the right level, both in specificity and jurisdiction for the potential safeguards or our guidelines. So I hope all of you might be able to address that.
Well, thanks for the narrow question, Mark. You've got a couple of things. And again, I'll let the technical guys talk about the technical, but you've got the technical regulation. How are we going to regulate the actual artificial intelligence and the Gen AI and the actual applications? And then you've got the practice of law side. When the first hallucination came out, you had all these judges saying you cannot use AI. Well, they didn't understand you couldn't turn your computer on when you started issuing such orders, and you had to get more specific and say, no Gen AI. Wait a minute, I don't get it. And so, there's that side of it. Whether or not, to Mr. Hawley's point of, confidentiality and privacy, do the lawyers understand and appreciate, how to use these tools properly and the rules of professionalism and how it already pretty much handles it. So I always say, education over regulation, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be changing some rules, such as the rules of evidence. And, you shouldn't be yelling deep fake because everybody's expecting a deep fake in front of a jury because you've just poisoned the jury. So it's a very big question that needs to be tailored to each individual thought and each individual bucket for that conversation. But again, I'll turn it over to the technical guys for the EU type AI acts.
Well, I can take a crack at this. I think there's a nice kind of connection between the question that came in on the chat and your question, Mark, is like, right, this question of how can you effectively identify what's been generated by AI and what's human created is actually quite difficult currently. There's a lot of software that promises to do that. That's not really very reliable at this point. There are certainly ways that the developers of these systems could make it possible by sort of basically like inserting kind of statistical little tricks that are hard for the human eye to catch, but are easy for a system to catch. That would like the one system to do this would be like basically put in an arbitrarily unusual number of a specific consonant that a human wouldn't write if they were writing it, but you could tell that this was AI generated because of that. And that goes to a point is like at this point, like, that kind of watermarking probably needs to happen at the developer level is like something that creates rules for who are the ones who are creating this technology, and not just the deployer level, those in the criminal justice system or elsewhere who are trying to use it to do their jobs better. And you mentioned the bill in Texas that's under discussion right now is like, right, they have requirements both at the deployer level, at the developer level, and the consumer level. And like this question of where it should be, which I certainly agree with the judge that there should be ways that we all are that there's applications for each level, and sort of this confusing mishmash of overlapping regulations is not the ideal situation. And we sort of have to figure out to use the most well-worn expression ever, we're building this plane as we're flying it. So we have to just keep going and think on all these levels simultaneously.
Anyone else want to address that?
I think
go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, just generally, I think, and I'm not commenting on the wisdom or lack hereof, but it feels to me that efforts to regulate AI are not likely to be successful. There are just too many incentives for businesses, for individuals, for nation states, and the nature of the technology is such that it's very difficult to get your hands around or curtail. And so, I mean, it's fun to talk about. I just don't know that it's going to happen.
Patrick, do you want to add anything?
I share Mike's perspective. Actually, I find it to be sort of an accelerating arms race, if you will, where new technologies are brought out on both sides. And certainly there's an interest in developers being able to appropriately authenticate something that's AI or not. And there's an interest in developers creating things that can just be passed as human created. So both of those incentive sets will exist. And I think really from my vantage point, the crux is developing human systems that can still help us function, resolve disputes, identify criminal responsibility, things like that. And we need to turn to ensuring that the systems of how our court systems are functioning that can help us navigate this process, because we're not going to have the ability to keep up with the technological development in a legislative or rule-making sense. We're going to have much more sort of flexible processes. It's one of actually the strengths of our adversarial system that we have an opposing counsel to ideally, identify where the challenges or the rubs are and how those might affect the rights of the litigants involved. So we might be better set up in some ways than many other countries because of how our judicial system works. You asked the question of, should we be looking at regulations at the, sort of federal or state or local or private sector level? I think there are some things that we could ask for at a higher level of government, like certain forms of transparency. But the transparency we would be asking for is if someone in our government is using software that relies on certain types of algorithms that we would call AI because of how they function, that they should say that they're using those. That's an example of something that we could legislate at a relatively high level. But when it comes to specific use cases or specific risks, it's just going to move too fast. And we as a country need to be able to innovate in order to keep up in this space. And if we get the regulation wrong, the risks are actually fairly substantial on both sides. If we're too restrictive, we're going to stifle a lot of economic opportunity and potentially other use cases. And if we're too permissive, we're going to create a lot of risks that will undermine the legitimacy of government and some of these other challenges. It is a incredibly hard space that we're trying to navigate right now. But transparency has to be the foundation.
Yeah, we've got a few other really interesting questions. One of them deals with data privacy, and I think another deals with kind of the question of what body of data is a particular AI application pulling from? Is it just public data, or could it be all the cases that have been in that jurisdiction or similar cases? And what are the privacy implications of that? And then we also have a question regarding the how this relates to Daubert and expert witness standards, like who would be qualified to testify to validate an AI tool. Are there that's a lot, but anything there that any of you might like to comment on?
Well, I think, to Patrick's point, the transparency part of this, again, I'm not a big fan of running out and changing rules and laws because we're legislating for today, and most of us don't understand where it's going to be tomorrow. And, just like, again, those judges' orders that came out, you didn't really understand the implications of those orders. But a couple of the things that I think we should be looking at is, if you are going to have an expert come in and testify into your Daubert question, and you know that your expert is relying upon AI to form the basis of his or her opinion, which is happening now, that you need to disclose, one, that the AI is being used either for creation of evidence or to form the basis of that. And you have to disclose that pre-trial so that we can live in motion and limine hell. I mean, that's, because we can't be doing this in front of the jury, because we have to come up with a way of, look, we've already considered all that, jury. Don't worry about that, because they're already thinking it's all fake and it's a deep fake and there's something wrong with it. So we need to do that ahead of the game and ask the lawyers. And if you have a reasonable suspicion that something is AI generated, you need to bring that up on the front end, because again, we cannot poison the jury with that. So I think those are kind of some of the rules that we need to think about. And as we're moving forward, always be open to regulations, but it's so quick and it's so soon and it's changing so much. Look, at the end of the day, I'd love for the smart people to build a machine in my courtroom, and you feed it the digital evidence they're going to say, and they're going to say, hey, judge, 70% chance that this is a deep fake. And I go, all right, let's have a hearing. And, to Jesse's point, it just doesn't exist today. They're trying to say that there's this deep fake stuff. And everybody always thinks in this, well, everybody's got money and we can hire all these experts that do not exist, or they do exist. Most of this stuff, people don't have budgets. They're going to Walgreens and they're printing these photographs and they're bringing them into court. There's no metadata. There's no C2PA certification here that somebody even understands these things. This is the justice system that, for the most part, is controlled mayhem, that we are just, going as hard and as fast as we can. And there's no time for these quote unquote experts. And what? Now their peer reviewed work is AI generated that was then peer reviewed by another AI generated guy or gal. Come on. How far are we going with this?
I want to carry one of Judge Schlegel's points forward as well. He made this reference to motion and limine hell. I think this is actually one of the most significant risks to individual rights and freedoms that we face, actually. As the criminal court system gets bogged down in a lot of these pretrial motions, the backlogs facing cases will extend, and prosecutors will feel even more pressure to plea bargain in their cases. I think there's already significant concern about the erosion of constitutional protections in the context of plea bargaining as it currently exists. And I think this pressure that some of this software might bring to bear could exacerbate that. And I think that's actually one of these sort of lurking worries that perhaps isn't getting as much attention as it could. We need to think about the intersection of how these tools interact with human systems. And if we accelerate one side of the system, we create a lot more work for opposing counsel. Maybe that helps our side win in the short term. But on a macro level, it has the real potential to bog down how our courts work. And that won't change the need of the prosecutors to seek justice. And so they might, again, use the other tools that are available, plea bargaining cases. In some cases, Mike, no offense, but in some cases, they might take advantage of the full weight of authority that the legislature has given them to stack charges and to raise criminal penalties. And that would all be to the detriment of individual rights in these cases. And I have a real strong concern about that. If I had to frame the larger point, it's that we can't just look at the direct effects of AI software as it's being used. We also have to ask questions about sort of the second order effects, the collateral consequences, if you will, to the system. And that's in particular very challenging. because I already said that I don't think regulation can take that challenge on, my belief is that we do need to partner with our practitioners and researchers and ask these questions in a way that ideally tells us whether the software is having the effect we want it to have, or whether it's causing more harm to our system to use it than whether the efficiency gain or some other benefit that we would get out of it. So we have to look not just to the direct effects, but also to these second order effects.
And just to affirm, Patrick, this is a complex system. This is a major change, and all these changes will have interactions that we can't really expect it, not just in the justice system, but in our economy, in our society, just across the board.
Yeah, it's really, yeah.
Echoing what everyone else said, I strongly agree. I think like one of the things that's so remarkable about AI is just how fast it can go, and it's in a complex system. The dynamics of like hitting the gas on one side and getting to 100 miles an hour in 3 seconds actually might not be what you want to do or what you intended to do, but where you find yourself with that. And on the question of Robert, I'm not a lawyer, so I might be don't obviously this is not legal advice. But I guess I think that they're like the complexity of this and the speed at which everything is changing is another indication to me that practitioners need to take some active role in understanding and specifically judges sort of seeing their role as gatekeepers in this domain seems really important. And it's quite intimidating because the technology is so complex, it's changing so fast, but there's no like law can't keep up with the pace of the technology. And so we're going to have things developed through case law, and then that requires that active participation from practitioners.
Yeah. And I would raise the question, like, how do you think about the question of just because we can do something doesn't mean we should? And so, and like the context can be very different. Like obviously using facial recognition to catch an Al-Qaeda member about to get on a plane versus, you could take the same facial recognition, scan the crowds of 50,000 people at Lollapalooza and figure out who was using drugs and try to bring a low-level possession charges against people days or weeks later, and no one complained about anything. So I think all of us, well, I might say many of us would probably see, many Americans would probably see those in two very different lights. And then the question is also on the standpoint of, I think you were alluding to, Patrick, if instead of like this freeing up resources for prosecutors, which it should, to do the stuff that only humans can do, what happens if like the policymakers funding prosecutors say, well, you should be able to do more with less because now you have AI. And so I'm not going to give you your funding increase. These are maybe some of the second order effects that Patrick, you were concerned about.
There's a fairly, well-developed theory, I suppose, in public administration referred to as Parkinson's law. And the gist of it is that bureaucracy eats all of the efficiency gains in the system. The bureaucracy will just gobble it up. And I personally believe that the efficiency gains that we'll get through this technology will also be erased by the bureaucracy itself. So I personally don't see this as creating a bunch of golf outings for our prosecutors and judges. I just don't think that's going to happen. And in the context of adversarialism, I think it's fairly easy to see this being an escalating arms race. As one side rolls out a technology that allows them to do certain types of tasks faster, the other side will have to respond in order to fulfill their obligations. So every technology that we've seen has honestly seems to have complicated the work of prosecutors and defense counsel. We thought body-worn cameras, as a society, we thought body-worn cameras would really improve accountability of law enforcement, and they created this insurmountable discovery burden where now no one can actually look at all the evidence that is apparently relevant to a particular case. I think AI will have a different version of that, where the second order effects will overcome some of what we expect to be benefits.
But that is within our control, and I think, Micah, you're able to kind of highlight some ways to kind of make sure this really does work to the benefit of both prosecutors and the defense lawyers. And maybe in some jurisdictions, the public defender and the DA's office should share the same application or something.
Well, I'll give you an example that, there are a number of body-worn camera images. We capture those, we upload them to a server, We can share them with the defense instantly, very quickly, so that they can advise their clients in a timely manner. If there's audio on that video, it can be transcribed quickly. The defense attorney can review that. We can review that. I mean, I think I don't want to completely oppose Patrick's views. There's a lot of wisdom there, but some of these technologies have allowed us to be more focused in our work, allow us to do true attorney work versus purely administrative work. And I think, speaking to our defense bar, they're grateful for a lot of this technology. So it's a mixed bag.
For sure.
I think we can look at one specific technology. Maybe this could anchor a little bit of the conversation. Something that Mike and I have looked at actually together is using AI to transcribe phone calls made by individuals who are being detained in jail.
Yeah.
And at this point, all of the calls in jail are recorded. Everyone gets a message at the outset of their phone call saying that they have no privacy rights in this phone call, et cetera, et cetera. But the vast majority of jail phone calls are not listened to. There's just not an ability to do that. And now AI could make that happen in a way that creates automatic summaries of jail calls. It allows us to identify and hone in on specific issues. Most of that, I would assume, would be inculpatory or benign, although there certainly is a possibility of exculpatory evidence being revealed in the context of these phone calls. But that's a very concrete example of something that is absolutely possible now. There are kind of some product limitations that exist right now that have prevented it from being rolled out fully. But it is within the realm of possibility, and I would imagine would be deployed within the next 6-12 months, if not sooner. And that will change a lot of the interactions between prosecution and defense, and could also change a lot of the behavior of people who are being detained awaiting trial.
We have a couple of questions that seem to deal with this more in the appellate context, the role of the judiciary in detecting the use of AI and written filings with the court. And, I know there have been instances where AI briefs were found, a couple cases were concocted out of thin air. It's a certain type of hiccup that happens with some AI. But could you all address this in that context?
Well, I mean, I'm a fan of lawyers should use any and all tools to benefit them and make better arguments to the court. Do your job. And if that tool, and you know how to use that tool, and you know how to use it private, right privacy, right, don't use free anything. If you know how to use it, you know how to, run with it. Rule 11 covers everything. If you sign your name to that dotted line, you're going to be held accountable for everything in it. So I gave a speech this morning to a bunch of civil lawyers, and I said, use it, know how to use it, and use it well. But that doesn't mean you use it all the time in every scenario. It doesn't mean that you ask ChatGPT to give you the first draft. Maybe you have, an LLM revise something for you, or, consider an argument for you in a better way, and use it to help you, get ready for oral arguments, use it to help you prepare witnesses and to prepare your questions for witnesses. So, I'm a big fan of lawyers using it. I always have the big question of, are you ready for judges to use it? And if you are, in what capacity? It's human judgment, keeping in the human in the loop is so important. And I think, the Judge Newsom experiment is a wonderful experiment for people to consider, to think. And I think that's a foot too far. We are bound by certain rules, and we should be looking at what's in the record that you've provided to us. So, I mean, that's another 3-hour conversation, Mark, that I don't think we're ready for today.
Well, if no one else wants to address that, go ahead.
Well, just a number of us use AI every day in this job, and it's like having a maybe sophomore college level student as an assistant. Do this initial work perhaps, and then let me oversee it, work on that. But you've saved me some time and frankly, maybe given some ideas that I hadn't thought of or that will lead to a better idea. So it can be, truthfully, it can be very useful. Patrick and his company have been very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, wait till you have agentic AI in a screening department.
There is, Judge, I'm on a committee, Prosecutor Center for Excellence AI committee, and there is a county in Massachusetts. They have 10 AI employees, and one employee They call her Sarah. She has a supervisor and a start date, and all Sarah does is open cases. And that is the future, I think.
That's fascinating. One question that was interesting, I think, was posed in the chat was about the accuracy of the underlying data. And is there anything like that, whether it's a prosecutor's office or elsewhere, the police, that they can do in terms of, trying to make sure the data that these applications are pulling from is as accurate as possible? And you have mistakes in names and various just obvious errors.
Yeah, one of the ways that we've approached this is actually to build from data that exists outside the criminal justice system, or to apply models that have been built outside the criminal justice system. That's far safer terrain because of the weaknesses in criminal justice data generally. And so until we have a strong sense of the integrity and fidelity of the data that we're using within the criminal justice system, I would offer that the vast majority of products will be built from data sets outside and then applied back in. And that goes for things that people are aware of that exist within the criminal justice system. Facial recognition technology that's being deployed by some law enforcement is built using, essentially all the social media posts that have been put up over the years. Everything that's on the internet is more or less has been made available to these companies, whether openly or not, and so those types of situations already exist where everything is being kind of built and developed outside the criminal justice system and applied in. There will likely be fine tuning that occurs using data within the criminal justice system. An example of that would be fine tuning a large language model based on state statutes, local policies, and maybe even template motions or things along those lines that exist within an office. You might see fine tuning of that within the criminal justice system. But I think the vast majority of the most powerful use cases will still be developed using data outside the criminal justice system, just because of the weaknesses in our data within the criminal justice system.
One thing I would add. I largely think I agree with that orientation. I think, right, like everybody knows the limitations and serious problems there are with criminal justice data. It's a big issue, and AIs have the ability to help remedy, if not mitigate some of that, is by sort of having automated systems for organizing and cleaning data. If someone's name shows up with 10 different spellings over the course of their involvement, AI can recognize that and sort of take that info and regularize it. And that's sort of another kind of orientation and possibility that AI could really do, is not just analyze the data, but gather it in a way that's hopefully will lead to more reliable information going forward.
Yeah, and Mike, I know you're part of the greater Houston area, Harris County and the surrounding counties, in your case, Montgomery County, which alone has 800,000 people. So my question is, there seems to be great potential for recognizing patterns to solve cases. And how does that work across systems that may not really speak to each other?
Yeah, that's very true. Let me give you one concrete example, and I'm almost out of time. Last week I was working, and some of our patrol cars have a system on that will scan all license plates. And there's a car stolen in Houston. Within an hour, it's on a system. In Montgomery County, the car's traveling through. An officer gets the alert, pulls the car over. There's a broken steering column, an individual on bond for stealing cars from Houston with several convictions for the same offense. He's arrested. Would not have occurred but for that technology. And there are other systems like that we're using. We're using it fairly aggressively too with online solicitation cases. Very quick story. When we're dealing with people who intend to have sex with a minor, they'll often want a photograph of the child. And with specifics, they'll say, I'd like a picture of you on the bus with 2 fingers up. And we're able to do that now without a real child being present. I know, again, there's a flip side of that, but this technology is very powerful. Again, goes both ways, but very useful.
Well, yeah, I think all of us want to solve more crimes. And likewise, there's examples where AI is being used to identify wrongful convictions by going through reams of documents to find patterns. So, I mean, it's incredibly powerful. And I know we're running out of time. Did anyone have a last minute thought? Otherwise, we probably need to wrap things up. Well, I just want to thank, this has been incredibly stimulating, and I hope and trust our audience has learned a great deal. And thank you for the excellent questions we got in the chat as well. I think we were able to get to just about all of them one way or the other. And I also finally want to mention, I think all of our speakers have written papers on this topic, and I hope that you will seek those out. I think they'll put more meat on the bones of the content we were able to get to today. So I will turn it back over. Tyler, thanks again for joining us.
I'll echo those thanks to our panel for taking this section of your days and sharing your valuable expertise and insight. We really appreciate the discussion and you making time for us. And thanks also to our audience for joining and participating. Welcome listener feedback by email at fedsocforums@fedsoc.org. And as always, keep an eye on our website and your emails for announcements about other upcoming virtual events. With that, thank you all for joining us today. We are adjourned.
Thank you for listening to this episode of FedSoc Forums, a podcast of the Federal Society's practice groups. For more information about the Federal Society, the practice groups, and to become a Federal Society member, please visit our website at fedsoc.org.